I'm delighted to be here and introducing our speaker today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Anthony Carpi. I'm Dean of Research at the college. And one of the most rewarding parts of my job is knowing that the research that we do at the institution not only impacts our various fields, but impacts our students. In helping them to become the professionals that they're striving to be. We know that undergraduate research affects persistence and retention. We also know that undergraduate research can really change a student's career goals and plans and help them better prepare to enter a professional workforce after graduation. So before I introduce our speaker, let me thank a few areas. First, our Teaching and Learning Center, the Office of Student Research and Creativity, and our Program for Research Initiatives in Science and Math for working together to co-organize and pull this event together. This event has some overarching themes focused on mentoring across disciplines, and this is why all these offices pulled this together. Our speaker today is Dr. Heather Falconer. Heather recently completed her PhD at Northeastern University in Boston. Heather's work has focused on the intersections of culture, discipline, and pedagogy, with a special emphasis on how undergraduate students develop their discursive identity, which means that's how students learn about the various modes of communication in a specific field based on how the professionals in that field communicate via conversation, publications, presentations, and other modes. Dr. Falconer is currently an assistant professor of writing at Curry College in Massachusetts, and she also serves as associate editor for the Perspectives in Writing book series, and she's the chair of the Research and Publications Committee of the Association for Writing Across a Curriculum. Significantly, Heather's no stranger to John Jay. She worked with us from 2010 to 2014, 2009 to 2014. She worked with our PRISM program. She helped translate all the funding we were receiving into programs that were impacting our students and how those programs were implemented and how that funding was allocated. So she knows the college well and is a good friend of the college. Today she'll discuss the results of one of her studies, which looked at the intersection of undergraduate research and writing instruction in the sciences. The study was conducted with some of John Jay's undergraduate researchers and their faculty mentors, making the work particularly relevant to us. She'll also discuss how her findings can inform the way we mentor our students to improve the instruction of writing in different disciplines. Please join me in welcoming Heather Falconer.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? All right. I can't hear myself, so that's kind of interesting. Thank you so much for that introduction, Anthony. As he said, I have deep roots here at John Jay, and I am thrilled to be back to present, to return, actually, the data to you, is the way I think of it, is as an ongoing relationship between you and me, the students, and I. And it's a project that is continuing. I am about 4 years into the study, and we've got another 3 years to go, so I hope to be back again in the future. Since 2015, I have been conducting an in-depth, longitudinal, qualitative case study of the Program for Research Initiatives in Science and Math, PRISM. To be even more accurate, what I've been doing is following the experiences of 11 different students as they make their way through the PRISM program. These students are all considered minorities in STEM. Some are white women, some are women of color, some are men of color. All of them are first-generation college students, and almost all of them come from what we consider low-income households. The project really evolved out of a curiosity about how people learn to read and write within a disciplinary community when they've historically not been part of that disciplinary community. Or that community of practice, if you're familiar with that terminology. And I've been interested in what factors play a role in that development. For example, gender, or ethnicity, or mentoring. The main focus of the research has been to examine the ways in which underrepresented individuals within STEM learn to read, write, speak, and listen as members of the disciplinary community. Though my work technically, as I was telling the folks at lunch, it falls into the discipline of writing studies, I consider myself an interdisciplinary scholar. So much of this work draws on sociocognitive research as well as research in education. So in addition to examining how students develop rhetorical skill in their respective discipline, I'm also examining the social factors like gender, ethnicity, and class that influence whether they see a place for themselves within the discipline and what that space might actually be. I'm hoping this is going to work. Yes, okay. And I apologize if some of these are a little small to read. I was envisioning a much bigger screen in the background. To provide a little bit of reference for how much data I'm drawing on for the discussion today, since 2015, I've been conducting semi-structured interviews with students every couple of months. Each interview tends to last an hour, where we discuss their reading and writing practices, their work with their mentors, and their sense of self within the discipline, their identity within the discipline. I've also conducted interviews with mentors, a bit less frequently, collected samples of writing from the students at all stages. So this includes research proposals, multiple drafts of them, research posters, if they've presented outside of the college, any kind of writing related to their disciplinary work. And that also includes feedback that they may have received from program coordinators or their mentors. All of the interviews were transcribed and coded, and all of the written documents were analyzed rhetorically. I'm not going to go into all the details of that methodology, but this gives you a little bit of an understanding of how much material I'm working with for today's conversation. There's actually more that's been collected in the last couple months. So what I'd like to also say is that while the research is applicable to education broadly, what I'll be focusing on today is the context of undergraduate research and what I'm finding to be effective mentoring practices for underrepresented students here at John Jay. I also want to say that though PRISM is a fairly robust program at this point, which is nice to see, the number of individuals who are working in specific areas are limited enough that my simply referencing a disciplinary area might be enough to break confidentiality. So in order to preserve that anonymity, I'm going to be speaking broadly about what I've learned from the project so far rather than focusing on individual cases. So I just said that what I want to focus on is undergraduate research, but I didn't really explain what that term is. And those who were with us at lunch, we had a nice brief conversation about the various levels that undergraduate research can encompass. I'm going to explain how I'm using it here. According to OSBORNE and KARUKSTIS, there are 4 key components that make undergraduate research. Those elements are mentorship, originality, acceptability, and dissemination. Mentorship, which is what most of today is going to focus on, involves a serious collaborative effort between a mentor and a student, where a student is engaged in a novel project and where the mentor is equally focused on the student's development as much as on the project itself. Originality is referring to the student being able to make a meaningful and authentic contribution to that scholarly problem or project. And the work theoretically should be novel, and how we qualify novel varies from discipline to discipline. In the context of this study, the work students are doing with their mentors in the laboratories are fairly novel projects. And it doesn't matter if the student originated that research project or if they're just joining a project that already exists. Acceptability is a term that we use to refer to students using the techniques and methodologies appropriate to the discipline. Things that you would in PRISM see an active researcher, a scientific researcher using those methodologies and techniques. And dissemination means that the project must include a final tangible product for which both the process and results are peer-reviewed or juried. So in this context, the PRISM Symposium counts as that, where students create proposals and create posters and disseminate their scholarly research. It also counts when students co-author with their mentors, which many do. What I'd like to do today is unpack this idea of mentorship a bit. What does this actually look like in practice? The serious collaborative interaction between a faculty mentor and a student. And what does that intellectual engagement actually look like? Surprisingly, this can be interpreted in very different ways with notable differences in terms of impact on the student. There are many models out there for how to facilitate undergraduate research, but the scholarly work it tends to focus on the idea of creating access and ensuring students have time and exposure to disciplinary work. The argument has essentially been, if we build it, they will come and they're going to succeed. But I'm going to push back against that a little bit, against that thinking, because the continued emphasis on time, exposure, and access over relationship, culture, and explicit instruction continues to privilege students who are already well represented in STEM disciplines, rather than help those who may be underrepresented. Simply providing opportunities for situated learning is not sufficient for helping students develop disciplinary identities or effectively engage rhetorically in their disciplinary discourse, meaning they're much less likely to persist. Mentor pedagogy, among other factors, plays a significant role. When students come to our classroom or to our laboratories, they bring their inquiry and enthusiasm. Right? And we as mentors and educators bring our research and expertise. By default, a third space is created where they overlap. And this third space is important to think more actively about because there's a lot going on there than we often realize. There's culture. Sorry, you can't really read that very well. There's culture, there's ontology and epistemology, right? The way I view the world, what I consider valuable information as a writing studies scholar or sociolinguist doesn't necessarily carry the same weight in a science discipline. There's prior knowledge of the student. There's history of the discipline, of the student's experience in academia, of the mentor's experiences as both a student and an educator. And when we're talking about underrepresented students in our disciplines, these things can become much more salient, not because of any deficits on students' part, because we're not engaging in deficit thinking, but because to ignore these differences is to perpetuate inequities. When we're talking about undergraduate research as a tool to improve retention and persistence and increase disciplinary diversity, that necessitates that we imagine research as a space that is empowering and equal, right? That recognizes difference as power, and that is not only for the exceptional student who already sees a place for themselves in the field, but doing this relies on the mentor to make it so and to guide that experience. So how on earth do we do that, right? Especially if you're teaching a full load of classes and you've got so numerous mentees. I, as a faculty member myself, am being pulled in 47 different directions, right? And I tend to bristle if anybody walks in and says, here are the latest recommendations, go do it. I'm like, oh, come on. So in being conscious of that, I decided that I was going to present what I found to be best practices in mentoring as rhetorical questions rather than as imperatives. They're things for us to be thinking about and considering. And there are three of them that I have in mind. The first one is, what if we think of curriculum as culture? If you are familiar with culturally responsive or culturally reflexive pedagogy or anti-racist pedagogies, this idea is probably not new, but I am going to push it a little bit more, a little bit further than typically is done. What if we think about the ways in which our disciplinary cultures reify particular ways of knowing? And what if we make teaching that disciplinary culture explicit to our students? And what if we ensure that that third space has room for critiquing the disciplinary culture from the outside? And I know these are heady questions, or ones I wrestle with myself, but I do think they're important. In my research, I found that when students encounter the disciplines as novices, they are intimidated by its culture. They're intimidated by the reading and writing practices, the discourse, which includes language and jargon, the methodologies used, the valuing of information, and in some cases, a lack of representation they see of people who look and sound like them. And that's a lot, right? That's a lot to have to push through on your own. And if you add on to that the fear of failure or disappointing somebody in a position of power, like your mentor, it helps us understand a little bit more what can push students away from our discipline or make it appear as though they're a little less motivated than others. So what does thinking of curriculum as culture look like in practice? Well, we can start by explicitly addressing the historical positioning of underrepresented groups within our field and the barriers that still persist. And this includes recognizing the culture from which our disciplines originate. So science, for example, has a strong history of being dominated by men of white European descent. It's well documented that this historical position has influenced the language of the field, the types of questions being asked and researched, the methodologies, and who is welcome into the space. And when we're mentoring students from underrepresented groups, it can be beneficial to openly address these factors that have contributed to their underrepresentation. In my research, I found that when faculty mentors explicitly address the underrepresentation of people of color in science, for example, they create a space where students who identify as a minority group see clearly that this underrepresentation is not correlated to any biological factors, but has really been about access and culture. Something as simple as addressing the visual and textual rhetoric students have been exposed to their entire lives can go a long way. Historically, for example, our science textbooks have quite literally put the contributions of women and people of color into the margins, right? As well as manipulated the stories. This isn't limited to gender and race, by the way. It's true for ableness, and it's true for learning differences as well. Yes, our textbooks are getting better, we know that, but it's important to remember that just because a student has made it here and they've declared a major in forensic science, for example, that these messages don't somehow still influence them, because they do. In fact, the students in my study, particularly the women, are acutely aware of their underrepresentedness and the biases that exist in their fields. They can feel it, even if they can't directly point to where it's coming from. And by not talking about it, we continue that traditional marginalization. Explicitly talking about these things also helps to counteract the imposter syndrome that presents itself quite a bit for students in their early stages. Many of the students in my study entered with this idea that they were being given something just because they were a minority, not because they earned it. Probably the most exciting finding for me is related to explicitly addressing this consideration of culture and history, is that many students begin to see their difference as power, right? They recognize that their social positioning provides them with a unique lens through which to view the work, views that represent, in many cases, large gaps in the field. One student, for example, told me that her experience as an African-American woman from a low-income family gave her agency within her home community and empowered her to pursue lines of research that are underexplored in the field of science, maternal death rates for African-American women, for example. So something as simple as talking about the discipline's culture can have powerful effects. There you go. The second question I'm going to put to you is related to the first. What if we remember that discourse is part of culture? Right? And here I'm drawing on Norman Fairclough's definition of discourse, that the way an individual speaks and writes, including what forms of writing that they feel comfortable engaging with and reading, these are deeply entwined with their social circumstances in which they've been conditioned. Students do not come to undergraduate research understanding the discourse of our disciplinary community. They just don't. They come with their home discourse, which may or may not even be English. There's a strong L2 community here, and there's also a strong community of English speakers with various dialects. So as mentors, as experts in our field, we're coming at it from the opposite direction. Because after, you reach the point where you have earned your doctorate, you're teaching, you're mentoring students in your own lab, you've become very accustomed to the ways in which your disciplinary community speaks and writes. So we come to the exchange from the other end of the spectrum, and the degree to which our students are recognized outside of our walls as members of the disciplinary community is deeply entwined with their ability to communicate as a member. So an important point to make here is that we have to remember that the reading and writing practices students learn in their composition and writing classes do not necessarily transfer to these new laboratory contexts or even our disciplinary classrooms. There are very important disciplinary conventions to take into account. Reading and writing are not stable skills that can be easily transferred from one context to another. What looks good writing in science, for example, looks pretty boring in English literature, and vice versa. So one important practice that we can adopt is to help facilitate that rhetorical skill through explicit teaching. There are wide variations in how discourse is handled within PRISM. Some mentors have adopted a view that students will pick it up through immersion over time. That's a very traditional view we see out in the field as well. Others have taken to teaching the discourse explicitly to various degrees. What I found in this work is that explicitly teaching the reading and writing practices of the discipline, what I'm going to refer to as mentored reading and writing, has powerful effects on both students' rhetorical skill and their identities as scientists. And that is huge, right? It's not just that they're able to communicate in a way that is seen as acceptable, but it affects how they view themselves within the community as well. The practice of mentored writing that's not just shared with a more experienced writer, but is actually explicitly directed, is not necessarily a new concept. Those of you who are maybe interested in creative writing or are writers generally will do that frequently. We have writing groups, we share our work, we talk through rhetorical moves that we make and try on new forms. And it's also a practice that undergirds much of the pedagogy we see in writing centers. But in disciplinary arenas, it's not as common, right? It's more an anomaly than anything. The most successful mentors I observed have a strong awareness of their students' reading and writing needs. Two mentors in PRISM are exceptional at this and have developed an explicit, scaffolded approach to teaching the genres, rhetorical conventions, and critical reading necessary to successfully engage with others as a scientist. And they've done so without really hampering their research process. This begins with the reading practices, providing students with selected articles meant to orient them to the research they'll be involved in. These articles include their own writing, which allows the students to see how the mentor themselves engages with the disciplinary community and how that differs in a journal article from how they communicate in the lab proper. Importantly, the mentors discuss their reading with the students to ensure that the students understand the context and learn how to get the important takeaways from the material. And they also push them to critically question it. not to take what they read as fact and move on. Another practice they do, there's a lot of alsos here, but true, these mentors do amazing work where they're discussing the recursive process of writing. We don't do it all in our head and then sit down and write our journal article and send it off. It takes time. It takes energy to think through our ideas and to process it on the page as well as in our heads. And some of that transfers to the students just in the sense of having them do multiple revisions or ask them to revise data sheets between experiments, especially as new questions arise. These mentors also read and comment on students' writing early and often. They provide constructive feedback that draws attention to the disciplinary jargon, and they do so in such a way as to present the disciplinary discourse as another language. And that's a really important element here to be thinking about, especially when we're working with students who maybe are multilingual speakers. If we present it as a second or third or fifth language, it's easier to think about how to engage with that than if we're pretending it's English and you should know how to do it. Right? Across all of my research participants, when mentored writing was used as part of the research experience, students showed an improved understanding of genre purpose and conventions. Their ability to read and retain disciplinary knowledge from the primary literature increased. Importantly, the positioning of scientific discourse as a dialect of English to be learned rather than something that should come naturally allowed them to see that communicating as a scientist in many ways is a code switching activity rather than the abandonment of their home discourse. This helped not only build rhetorical facility, but also helped situate these students as insiders within the scientific community. And the impact of this particular pedagogy is really profound. When I look at the students who have had this kind of guidance versus those who did not, it's amazing to see what a difference that is. And I think we're going to do maybe a workshop on that at some point in the future. The third question I'm going to pose to you has two parts, and it is a little bit provocative. What if we recognize that mentor-student fit is critical for student success and that our preferred mentoring practices are not appropriate for all students? In the diversity and inclusion world, there have been many scholarly conversations regarding representation, the need for students to see people who look and sound like them in positions of power. And my research supports that, doesn't take away from that at all, but it does complicate it a little bit. In the context of mentoring, fit is far more extensive than a mentor and mentee sharing a similarity such as race or gender or language or even area of study. As Baker, you can't really see that quote, but as Baker, Pfeiffer, and Griffin note, fit is achieved through the presence of shared values, complementarity, and mutuality. So both the mentor and the mentee must have some kind of common goal and means to achieving that goal. Each play a role that benefits the relationship, and each offers something to the other. So in short, that relationship needs to be bidirectional and not unidirectional. It's not about the mentor imparting bits of knowledge into the student. The student has stuff to offer as well. While fit has been a great concern to scholars working in organizational and management realms, it's largely focused on employer-employee relations and the influence on productivity. But we know that mentors play a different role than supervisors, and we have to really think about that impact on the lives of our students. So it requires a different understanding of fit. We need to take into account how the mentor views the relationship, including what their expectations are, how the student views the relationship, and where there's agreement and dissonance. For example, imagine that we have a student who enters the undergraduate research experience with an expectation that the experience will be a lot like a directed study. They believe their mentor is going to spend a lot of time with them, guiding them through the stages of research, telling them what to read, telling them when and what to write. Hand-holding might be a phrase that you can attribute to that. that student enters with a very specific set of assumptions and expectations. Now imagine that the mentor has 10 or 12 other students working in their lab whom they expect to do this onboarding. Right? Imagine that this mentor also believes that it's the student's duty to seek out scholarly literature related to the lab work, to read it, and to then propose a topic for research. The mentor's assumptions are that the student enters knowing that this needs to be done, as well as how to do it. There's an enormous dissonance there between the student and the mentor. Depending on the mentor's individual, prior experience as learners and teachers, they could begin to unintentionally make assumptions about one another. The mentor might find themselves saying, the student is underprepared for research, so I need to give them really simple tasks. Or the student isn't invested in the work, right? I don't have time for this. The student might say, my mentor treats me like a child. I'm just a bench warmer. Or worse, I don't think I belong here. I don't belong in science. I wish I could say I made those quotes up. I did not. They come directly from the data. When a mentor and a mentee do not fit because of expectations and pedagogy, it can tear at the student's identity and reinforce the belief that they don't belong. Because when a student fails or fails to meet our expectations, that failure often becomes internalized as evidence that they don't belong. Maybe they don't belong in science, maybe they don't belong in college. And they don't necessarily recognize that failure as simply not yet possessing the necessary skills to thrive within the undergraduate research context. As mentors, we have a responsibility to make sure that our expectations and pedagogy are appropriate for students working with us in undergraduate research. It's up to us to let students know outright what it will look like to work with us in the research context, and for us to decide whether we're going to alter our practices when our approaches are not working. Administrators of programs also have a role in helping students find mentors who are appropriate to their learning needs. It isn't always about what subject of study the mentor examines or what gender or ethnicity they are, though if those can be accommodated, all the better. As mentors, self-reflection is key. We need to recognize what we do well and where we can also improve. Some people are great working with students we would consider underprepared for college, others not so much. And it doesn't mean that the latter group aren't good mentors, just that maybe they're likely good mentors for more traditional STEM students. And I want to move away from being a little didactic there. I know I was kind of going there, but returning to my question asking, what if we start new students in undergraduate research by asking them about how they learn best, right? When was a really great learning, powerful learning experience for them? What if we ask them both what they hope to get out of the experience and what they think they're offering our laboratory? Because we don't want to do them the disservice of thinking that they aren't bringing something to offer. And that something might come from their personal experiences outside of school. It might come from how they already problem solve. The process of building a member of our disciplinary community is not about stripping from them who they are or what they are, but rebuilding, right? Merging what is already there into this new identity. What I found in my research was a broad continuum in mentoring pedagogy. Some students, honestly, are put into a laboratory setting as though they're just another cog in a machine doing a mentor's work. And I should say that by that definition that we started with for undergraduate research, that scenario doesn't really count. But the overwhelming majority of mentors do wonderful work that is considerate of the student and the life and learning that has occurred outside of academia. And that's what I'm arguing we want to do more of. When mentors take time to manage their relationships with their mentees, identifying what each has to offer and gain from the relationship, and matching their instructional needs of the student with their pedagogy, students thrive. They're able to see a place for themselves clearly within the field, and maybe even more importantly, it provides space for them to think through identifying what kind of scientist they wish to be. And by that, I don't mean a disciplinary affiliation, though that might be the case, but rather a scholarly identity. What kind of scientists will they be? How will they view the world? What kind of questions will they pursue? And that is really important work. As I said at the beginning, what we're talking about today is only a small part of the larger study that I'm conducting. Still, I believe it gives us as educators and mentors more insight into the ways in which we can make our classrooms and research spaces much more inclusive. For example, we should be mindful of meeting students where they are, as well as being mindful of our own assumptions and preconceived ideas about who our students are and what they're capable of. We've all heard that argument that students who persist have grit, that they need to have grit so they can navigate the real professional world of our disciplines. And while there is some element of truth to that, because there is a larger world out there that our students do have to encounter and be prepared for, I have to say that of all the students I've ever known at this college, whether it was through this research study or my prior years, none of them have ever lacked grit. That's never been an issue. In fact, some of them are the most hardworking and resourceful people I know, and that includes seasoned adults. But they've had additional obstacles in their way, and some of those are explicit and some of them are implicit. What seems critical in this research so far with regard to how students transition through their undergraduate research experiences is the strong influence of how students position themselves, consciously or unconsciously, as a result of the obstacles they face, and how they're positioned by others, by their peers, by their mentors, by other scientists outside. Preconceived ideas of both what they believe themselves capable of and what others believe them capable of influences whether they see a place for themselves in the field. And as mentors, we play a critical role in that self-view. A second consideration is about how beneficial it can be to students who have mentors who can decode their discipline's culture, not only making the ontological and epistemological views transparent, but the ways in which those are built into the way the community functions and communicates. If we can teach our discipline's discourse as though it were another language, making the rules explicit, it can help students immensely. By building that into the undergraduate research process, for example, when students are composing research proposals or beginning to collect data, then we not only helped build rhetorical awareness, but procedural and content knowledge as well. They're all very deeply intertwined. And finally, when bringing students into the undergraduate research experience, we want to remember that not all mentors are appropriate for all students. What represents good mentoring for one student can actually be detrimental to another. Though undergraduate research is highly beneficial to students from all backgrounds, simply placing a student into a laboratory and expecting them to learn the ways of being and thinking and knowing in our discipline is really unfair, and it serves to further marginalize students from non-traditional backgrounds. Hispanic and minority-serving institutions, just like John Jay, have enormous potential to diversify the STEM workforce and higher education more broadly, if the educational experiences consider the ways in which culture and curriculum are intertwined. The students here are primed to engage in those conversations and are ready to use their cultural capital to change the world. As this quote from, I don't know if you can really read it from that distance, but one of my participants noted that there's this affinity with the faculty and the institution because of its diversity. And they're looking for opportunities to unpack it explicitly so that they can be better prepared for when they leave these walls. Though undergraduate research, or through undergraduate research, we have an opportunity to make a profound impact and be a model not only for other institutions, but for our students themselves, because these students may likely one day be mentors themselves. They might be faculty who come back. And the experiences that they have here will have important impacts on how they engage with their mentees 10 or so years from now. And thank you for listening. I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Please.
Did you evaluate the impact of whether students had stipends or financial support?
Did I notice?
Evaluate the impact of stipends or financial support since students who are highly motivated are also have financial responsibilities to family?
Absolutely. Within the study, all of the students who were considered who volunteered to be participants were receiving stipends. So I can't really speak to whether or not that's true for students outside of PRISM who are also doing undergraduate research. But there was a wide continuum in terms of how much money students were getting and how much work and how much time they were spending in the laboratory. So in terms of that variability, that did not seem to have much of an impact on their learning. It's a great question, though. Any question? Please.
You had a line. You had a line where you mentioned that some students felt like imposters. And when I heard that, I jumped to the answer that, well, when I was in graduate school, I felt like an imposter because everyone was smarter than me, and I was just pretending that I was as smart as everyone else. But you qualified that as saying some of the students don't know whether they were given a gift, that this is a gift that they're in this program, or whether they earned their way into it. Now, some students would think they're all given the gift, or others would think we all earned our way in here, and that's not the case. So how does the student who earned their way into the program because of being prepared and being smart and being capable, and another student is given the opportunity to get into that program, how do you deal with that difference that these two students, both may be immigrant students, both may be from underrepresented groups, but one has been given it and the other has been earned it. So how do you deal with that issue?
I think it depends on how you want to qualify earning it. Because of the students who are in PRISM, I would argue they've all earned it. I don't think anybody's being given anything. And I honestly don't think when these students have, because some of them have done work outside of the college as well, that's included, they see it. All right, so for example, one of my research participants did an outside summer program that had around 65 students participating, undergraduates. Only 5 of those 65 were Black. Only 5 out of 65. So even though she earned it and she was well qualified for the position, she kept going, am I here because I'm a token minority, right? And I think here at John Jay, because it's a Hispanic serving institution, a minority serving institution, it's a little less of that, but because it's a public institution and because maybe the entry to admission here is not quite the same as it might be at Northeastern, students are wrestling with that, right? And so I feel like as mentors, regardless of how prepared our students come to us, it's our job to figure out where they are and then help them get to where they want to be. Not where we want them to be, but where they want to be. I'm not sure if that's really addressing your question, but that imposter syndrome is there. I feel it. I still feel it. I feel it standing here. You know, when I think about where I started at John Jay a decade ago, and now I'm back here presenting this research, I'm acutely aware of this positionality shift, right? But it's going to take time, and I think it takes explicitly addressing it with the students to say, you're not being given anything here. You've earned it. You deserve it. Yeah. Sure.
I just want to piggyback on this quickly. I think it's also important to emphasize, how important the research you are doing is, and how encourage them and really tell them this is really good work, this is really important work, and you're part of it, and your contribution is, really matters. And when they feel that from their mentor, they totally they get it, and it's important to encourage them basically and make them feel really like they belong here.
Absolutely. We were talking during a lunch about those relationships that we have with our students and how important they are, of finding places where you can connect with them. It might not be language or race or gender. It might be something as simple as, I really like to play Minecraft, and hey, we've bonded over this thing. Once you find that connection, and then also nurture that relationship, as Elise is saying, it's just really important to keep emphasizing that the work is good and they value, what they're doing is valuable.
First of all, thank you for coming to give this talk. It's excellent, so appreciate you coming back to us. So I direct the Writing Across the Curriculum program, and you mentioned 2 faculty mentors who had a profound impact on their students, and that is indeed what we find all the time, individuals within departments who do amazing and excessive and above and beyond kind of work. What would you recommend as far as making that a little more of a systemic approach, as opposed to just the luck of the draw for those lucky mentees who got those mentors?
Oh, that is a phenomenal question. So I have an agenda. My agenda is to make education as equitable as possible, and I do believe as a writing studies scholar that language is one of the ways that we do that, by breaking down those barriers. If I were to come back to John Jay or build my own undergraduate research program, not just in science, but in any one, I would make, number one, the explicit teaching of disciplinary discourse, whether it's a writing in the disciplines course, right? I've taught writing in the sciences and social sciences for years, but we can do this for any discipline. You could do it as a summer course. You could do it integrated into the program. I think it requires faculty thinking, being guided in the process of how to unpack a discourse that they've already kind of become entrenched into, right? To think about, hey, how does the way I communicate in psychology differ from the way Mary does in education? Like, there are important differences there, and we need to unpack those. In an ideal world, I would love to see students getting that disciplinary instruction from hybrids, right? I think writing faculty and disciplinary faculty have important opportunities to work together to really make that language transparent. So I would be looking to build a program, really, that in my ideal world would do that. But in place of that, we have faculty who do it really well. And maybe it's faculty workshops, and then we build it out from there. Maybe it's when new mentors come in, we do some explicit teaching with them before they even start working with students. Yeah, that's something we could certainly hash out.
Thank you for this talk. This is amazing and really helpful. But what I was thinking about was similar to the prior comment. This is a very helpful workshop for those of us who are here to become better mentors. But it seems to me that a lot of what you're saying gets to the question of whom we hire to be our colleagues in the first place. There's sort of 2 ways to hear this talk. One is every student has different personalities and backgrounds and so forth, and we need to find the right mentor to match that student. But another way is that most of the students here are in the same group, which is non-traditional students, and there's special needs that that group of students has. And it seems that you're suggesting that sometimes some faculty will bring classist and racist assumptions to how they mentor students. And if that's the case among faculty who are here, is there a way to push through that? Or is it better to try to hire better faculty in the first place?
Well, I mean, I think if anybody's on a search committee, you should be thinking about those things. Absolutely.
Everyone on the search committee is thinking about this.
Right. Yeah. Though I would push back against that a little bit and say that I think that there's a place for diversity and inclusion discussions across an institution. So it may be, and often is the case, and in fact, in this study, when I did encounter it, it wasn't that there were, malicious intents. There was just that maybe a faculty member has been indoctrinated into their discipline to think a certain way, and what they need is somebody from the outside to say, hey, let me show you why maybe we should tweak that practice, or maybe we could stop assuming your student is lazy or bored and go, what else might be going on here? And I don't think of anybody that I've worked with that would be resistant to that. I think it's just a matter of pointing it out. Yeah, and I've tried to be very careful as a researcher to keep my distance of not, telling them what they're supposed to do, but suggesting, why do you think that way? Talk more about that. But yeah, if anybody's on diversity and inclusion committees, it's a great opportunity to talk about that stuff too. Yeah.
Heather, I came in late, so if you address this, I apologize. For those mentors who aren't doing a good job, and they just wrote, are we doing a good job in PRISM letting the students know you don't have to stick with this mentor, you can switch out? Or do they feel once they sign up, they're stuck in that lab?
That's a fantastic question. I didn't address that. First of all, I don't think there are any mentors doing a bad job. I definitely don't want to say that. I want to say that there are some whose students will excel at a faster rate because of their practices than others. But with that specific question, I think you could do more in terms of letting them know it's okay to say this is not a very good fit. And some students are going to come in with the agency already to say, I don't like this situation, I'm going to move. Most of them not so much. Yeah, so there is that thought. Because what ends up happening is it's internalized as I'm not performing, I'm not doing a good job. There's something wrong with me. Not that maybe my mentor's expectations are off, or maybe this just isn't the right sort of lab situation for me, right? Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah. I don't know, whoever has the microphone.
Were you able to sort of identify the degree to which mentors had an awareness about their own effectiveness, their own availability, sort of all of the aspects that go into good mentorship? Were the mentors sort of accurately able to assess for themaselves where they fell in those aspects?
That's a brilliant question. I haven't systematically examined that specific thing, looking at transcripts, but my immediate response would be that most of the time, yes, sometimes no. Yeah, but I would think overwhelmingly there's a good sense that they know when they're doing a good job with these particular individual students. Yeah.
If it's understood that that the fit is important, then doesn't it make sense to just build in the evaluation at the end of 6 months or at the end of a year to make it a part of the ongoing process? So then it doesn't depend on the student to come forward. It just becomes an automatic, confidential process.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea. One of the things that Anthony and I talked about over the summer was even requiring incoming research students to interview mentors, and not just interview mentors, but actually interview the students that are already working in their lab to identify what it's really like to work there and what the expectations are, so that they can do a little bit of self-evaluation before they even get in there. Yeah, it's a great idea, though, to build that in.
And I will point out that Ed has incorporated some of those things.
Yay.
But my question goes back to some of these earlier questions. You spoke about fit from the student side, asking the student about experiences, et cetera, but you didn't speak about fit from the faculty side. So I'm interested, if any thoughts you have about kind of getting a sense of a mentor from that side of things to explore this idea of fit.
I think, again, another thing that could be incorporated, whether that's for new mentors or for existing ones, is to do that self-reflexivity. I didn't explicitly point that out in talking about it, but I do think it's important that mentors think about really what their expectations are and what they think is appropriate for sophomore or a first semester junior walking into that laboratory, what they're going to be able to do, what they're not going to, and to consider whether or not they should have 12 students in their lab or 4 students in their lab. Like there's a lot that goes into that, and I think what ties into it also is what's the end result you're looking for. At lunch we were talking about why are you interested in mentoring? What's the motivation there? If it's to have bodies to help you do your research, then maybe you have more people in your lab. If it's to really cultivate a scientific identity in a student and promote them and nurture them onto graduate programs and such, maybe you don't have quite as many in there. Yeah.
Any other questions? Going once, twice?
Those are
Thank
amazing
you,
questions.
Dr. Falconer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. And on behalf of Gina, Bettina, and I want to thank you for coming, and also thank Heather for coming and telling us about her work. And hopefully you'll accept another invitation next year to come back and really delve more into this subject. I would like to remind everyone to return the surveys that we passed at the beginning, and that we're going to send a post survey to everyone. If you can fill it out, it will just take a couple of minutes. It will be very helpful for us. And finally, thank you for coming, and make sure you sign the sign-up sheet when you came in. If you didn't, there will be ones in the way out. Thank you.